we're picking back up in our study of the Olivet Discourse out of Matthew 24. Jesus is continuing. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Now, what does it mean then? He means when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place. We spent a lot of time talking about what we think the abomination of desolation might be. Looks like it's going to turn out to be the Antichrist entering into the temple itself, potentially a rebuilt third temple, stopping the daily sacrifice, setting himself up as God, proclaiming himself to be God, to be above all supernatural beings. And that's going to be the trigger that kicks off what Jesus refers to as the Great Tribulation. He says, when you see that, the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, and we saw that there were some other contenders. We saw Antiochus Epiphanes, but that would have been in Jesus' past. That doesn't make sense contextually for him to tell his disciples that when you see the abomination of desolation, it already happened 100 and something years prior, to flee from Judea. That doesn't seem to make sense. Titus was a possibility. He did destroy the temple, and he did set up an altar to Zeus there, or Jupiter, the Roman god of mythology, and sacrifice a pig on it, and that could meet the criteria, but he wasn't in the most holy place. And there doesn't seem to be any covenant that was established there. So that doesn't seem to fit our prophetic profile either. Probably a type of the Antichrist, a type of the archetype yet to come, the prince who is yet to come. But Jesus is saying, when you see this happen, when you see it, that's specifically what he says, when you see it happen, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever's on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his cloak. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. Now, a couple of things. These instructions apply to people who are in Judea. Well, that would be the Jews, primarily. So the specific instructions here are to the Jews that are living in Judea. Now, if you happen to be on vacation in Jerusalem when this occurs, well, yeah, you need to flee too. But this is the specific thing is directed here, I think, primarily at the Jews anyway. It's also, there's this instruction to pray that it doesn't happen on a Sabbath. Well, a Christian wouldn't really be particularly concerned about that, because we're not bound by the law of the Saturday Sabbath, but a devout Jew would be very concerned about having to do something of this nature on the Sabbath. So Jesus, it seems to have a Jewish connotation here. That's why I continue to say that I think that God's not done with the nation of Israel yet, and the nation of Israel plays a very important part in end-time prophecy, and the church has not replaced Israel. We've been grafted into that cultivated olive tree Paul talks about in the book of Romans, and we share the blessings, and we share specifically the blessings of Abraham as a result of that. But we haven't replaced. I reject the replacement theology, and I know there's many that disagree, but I reject that particular view. And this is part of what we're seeing here, I think, unfold. Now, Matthew continues to record what Jesus says. Jesus says, for then, after the abomination, or the time of the abomination of desolation, for then there will be a great tribulation. And there's our term, great tribulation. Jesus is specifically talking about that final 3.5 years. If Daniel is correct, of course he is, because he's reporting what Gabriel told him, that the abomination of desolation will happen in the middle of the week. It's the 70th week, that week of years. Then we're looking at about a time period of about 3.5 years in. And as he goes on to describe this great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. And unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. So there's a number of things here. First of all, there's a technology statement associated with this. That no life would be saved if the days had not been cut short. Well, think about it from the standpoint of Matthew, and also, of course, John writing Revelation in the first century. The concept of technology that could have killed everybody on planet Earth would have been very, very foreign to them. But we have that technology available today. And then secondly, for the sake of the elect, that means there's still going to be church. There's still going to be Christians. There's going to be the church. It's still going to be here. The elect, the ecclesia, the called out ones. There's going to be some of us that are here during this time frame. All right, so Daniel talks about the abomination of desolation happening in the middle of the 70th week. So there's about 3.5 years after the treaty is confirmed, the covenant with the many. That's what starts the clock ticking. The abomination of desolation occurs right in the middle, and 3.5 years after that's when Jesus returns. So that's our prophetic timeline here. And Jesus calls it the Great Tribulation, not to confuse it with that full 7-year period. I probably beat that horse to death by now, since we're studying about the 4 horsemen. That's interesting. But at any rate, I don't want you to confuse it, and because of the precision associated with this. The Great Tribulation is the last 3.5 years. When we say the word tribulation, if we're not careful with it, we can confuse people. So when we talk about pre-tribulation rapture, mid-tribulation, post-tribulation, we're referring to that last 7 years in total. So we got to be careful with how we do that. The 3.5-year period will be described a number of different ways in our study of end times prophecy. We'll see it referred to as 1,260 days. Remember, these are 360-day years. So 3.5 of them will be 1,260 days. We'll see it referred to as 42 months. These are 42 30-day months. We'll also see it referred to as times and half a time. And we'll look at those other examples as we get deeper into our study. I think when we get around Revelation 12, we'll start picking up on that. So I mentioned the technology statement. That's there in verse 22. It would have been a very foreign idea for a first century individual like Matthew or John to think about any kind of warfare technology that could destroy the entire planet in terms of the population. But we've seen that technology developed only in the last century, in the 20th century, and we're really the first generation, I am anyway, that has lived under the threat of nuclear annihilation because of the technology advancements. So we're going to pick up on a number of these technology statements as we continue our study. All right, let's pick back up. Then if anyone says to you, behold, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe him. For false Christ and false prophets will arise and will show great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Jesus does not want us to be misled. All right, and we've already seen that the false Christ come. I think that's going to end up being the first horseman, the rider on the white horse. He's going to be the false Christ that come in. Behold, I have told you in advance. So if they say to you, behold, he's in the wilderness, do not go out. Or behold, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. So it's not going to be a secret event. The second coming of Jesus Christ, everybody's going to see it. Every eye is going to see it. And he goes on to say, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. That's a very enigmatic statement there in verse 28, I think is probably going to refer to the great supper of God. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's go back to Jesus' return. There's going to be no mistaking when he comes back. He doesn't come quietly. He doesn't come in secret. We may not know exactly when he's coming, but once he comes here, there will not be any doubt about it. And we mentioned the great supper of God that's outlined in Revelation 19. I always like to throw this in as a trivia question. Who wants to attend the great supper of God? You know, it sounds like something good. I do. Nah, not so fast. Let's take a fast forward to Revelation 19. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried out with a loud voice, saying, to all the birds which fly in mid-heaven, come, assemble for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of commanders, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and those who sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free men and slaves, and small and great. So we don't want to be on either end of the great supper of God. It has a different kind. We want to be there for the wedding supper of the Lamb. That's what we're after, not the great supper of God. All right, picking back up, Matthew 24. Watch the timeline that's beginning to unfold here. But immediately after the tribulation of those days. What days? The Great Tribulation, the 3.5 years where we've never seen a tribulation this great ever in the past and never will see it again. Immediately after that tribulation, Immediately after those 3.5 years, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And we're going to see that described in great detail in Revelation 19. He goes on, and he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet. All right, pay close attention. We're picking up on some clues about our rapture view here. We've already got past the Great Tribulation, right? The abomination of desolation happens halfway through. The Great Tribulation is 3.5 years. After the tribulation occurs, we see the sun darken, this cosmic upheaval that's taking place. And then he's going to send forth his angels with a great trumpet. And they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. So that sounds an awful lot like the rapture to me. And once again, we see the second coming, we see a great trumpet here, and we see the gathering together of the elect all occurring contemporaneously with each other at the end of the tribulation period, or the 70th week. So there's lots of clues there about Jesus' return. It's immediately after the Great Tribulation. Every eye's going to see him. How is every eye going to see him? Well, again, a technology statement. Could be CNN. I just picked them. There's all sorts of 24-hour news networks that are out there. It could also be this, and this is speculative, but it kind of makes sense. What if Jesus elects to return over a 24-hour period? In other words, enough time for the earth to make one full rotation, 24 hours. And so if Jesus, well, here's my globe. I can use this as an illustration here, right here. I got a prop. If Jesus is coming back, let's say slowly, 24-hour descent, I think I'm spinning it the right way, 24-hour descent as the earth spins, then by the time he touches down in Jerusalem, it's over here, by the time he touches down in Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives, every eye has seen him, because the earth is rotating. It's just like everybody can see the sun in a 24-hour period on planet Earth. So unless you're at the very, very tip ends of the poles, but even then, you can get glimpses of the sun even there. So that's possibly, and I think that has some merit. My prop back. We'll see what happens as it unfolds. Okay, the angels are going to be sent forth with a great trumpet. We mentioned that. They're going to gather the elect, and we see this sequence of events, and that's one of the reasons I tend to fall into category of the seventh trumpet rapture at the end of the Great Tribulation before the seven bowls of wrath. We're going to get to those when we get to them. And remember, these are birth pangs. They start out slow. They start out in a lower intensity, and then they accelerate with greater intensity, and it may very well be that those seven bowls of wrath are let loose, those judgments let loose in one day, one 24-hour period. That's kind of the way I gravitate the great day of the Lord. So that brings us to a place to stop here. We've hit you with the three primary tribulation views, as well as how it ties into the Olivet Discourse, and we're starting to see a sequence of events unfold on our prophetic eschatological timeline.